Hello everyone, this is Dr. Mo here. Before you venture into this episode, I just thought to share this wonderful announcement with you. So, as at the time of this recording, I didn't know a lot, about intestinal malrotation, which you'll be hearing a lot about today. And so right after this episode, you definitely want to catch on the very next episode, which will be released right after this, okay? And it's featuring Dr. Martinez's daughter, Amelia, who's 5 years old. She's a super bright, courageous 5-year-old girl who's making waves, advocating for intestinal malrotation, which you'll be hearing about today. So together with her mom, Dr. Martinez, whose story you'll be hearing about today, shares her remarkable journey and experiences living with intestinal malrotation, from hospital visits to moments of bravery. Amelia's story is one of resilience, hope, and the power of community. So don't miss out on the follow-up episode with Amelia. And I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Martinez for suggesting this right after we taped this episode. And it's a very robust episode. And I think even hearing from the mouth of a child who has gone through that experience was a very humbling experience. And I hope to everyone listening to this, you just understand the power of community. And if you'd like to hear more about what they're doing, I'm putting a lot of links in the resource page so you can check out more about intestinal malrotation and how to join that community if you have any questions. Or you can reach out to either myself or Dr. Martinez or Dr. Corcoran. Bye for now and enjoy the episode. You ready? Let's do it. Welcome back to the GROklahoma podcast, where we shine a light on the remarkable individuals and groundbreaking work happening here in Oklahoma's clinical and translational research. Today, we're joined by not just one, but two distinguished guests whose personal experiences have led them to champion research and advocacy for a condition that has touched their lives intimately. And that condition is called intestinal malrotation. First up, we have Dr. Sydney Martinez. She's an assistant professor in epidemiology at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, with over 15 years dedicated to tribal and community engaged research. Dr. Martinez has focused predominantly on addressing health inequities, specifically among indigenous populations in the context of tobacco use and its intersection with diabetes. A turn in her personal life led her to pivot in her research when her daughter was born with intestinal malrotation in 2018. Since then, she has transformed her professional trajectory to establish Empower, which is the Intestinal Malrotation Patient Outcomes and Wellness Registry, which is a self-online reported registry, which seeks to characterize the natural history of this congenital anomaly. Today, she not only conducts clinical and transitional research, but she also spearheads a national patient-generated registry, tapping into her expertise of community engagement and epidemiology to drive improvements in patient outcomes. Alongside Dr. Martinez today, we have Dr. Katie Corcoran. She's a prolific researcher and professor of sociology from all the way back at West Virginia University. She has a PhD in sociology that is integrated with international studies in comparative religion. She examines the fabric that weaves individuals together within various social contexts, from organizations to culture, and from inequality to social movements. Her keen insights into how individuals and groups interconnect provide a unique lens to the complex dynamics involving patients, caregivers, and the medical community. Her scholarly contributions include The Notable Religious Hostility, a global assessment of hatred and terror, and her recently published manuscript called High on God, How the Mega Church Conquered America. All this showcase her depth and flexibility in exploring various facets of social life, which she now brings to patient-engaged research and advocacy for intestinal malrotation. Together, these two remarkable women forge a dynamic partnership that bridges institutions and disciplines, and most importantly, connects the scientific community with the families affected by this rare condition. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Dr. Corcoran and Dr. Martinez to the podcast. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Wow. What a bio. Just even reading through that and the stories behind them and the events and everything that had to happen to bring you here today. I'm very, very honored to have you on the podcast. But I'm curious to start from the very beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about both of your lives and your early experiences?
Sure. So I can start. So I'm originally from Oklahoma and moved around quite a bit as a child. Both my parents are in have backgrounds in science, and so I was really drawn to everything about science. Really loved health and medicine, and then discovered epidemiology and realized I could, help answer questions about health on a population level by studying patterns and on health outcomes. And so when looking at these patterns, you realize some people have a bigger burden of negative health outcomes than others. And so I started working towards ways of improving health outcomes for those groups.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Dr. Corcoran?
Yeah, I grew up in the greater Seattle, Washington area, so sort of far from where I am now. I did my undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Washington, and that's when I was introduced to sociology. Actually, the very first course I took was in sociology, and so I became really interested in how social factors affect people's beliefs, behaviors, and outcomes.
Wow, thank you so much. So, of course, the big question is, how did you both meet? And can you share with us the journey that led you to both become deeply involved in the research and advocacy you do for intestinal malrotation?
Yeah, so we actually met through a Facebook group called Awareness for Malrotation. So we both each have a child that was born with intestinal malrotation in the same year, so 2018. And so my daughter was born with intestinal malrotation and diagnosed when she was about 2 weeks old. She then had abdominal surgery, which is called the LADS procedure, right after that. And then we were told she would completely recover and we would never know that anything was wrong. But she continued to have some significant challenges with feeding and digestion and a lot of pain. So I joined the Facebook community looking for others that knew something about intestinal malrotation and saw some of the same patterns that we had experienced and a lot of sort of unmet needs. My epidemiologic hat saw these patterns that were not described in the literature that I was reading. And so I just, started reaching out to other patients. I met Katie shortly after that, and she was kind of doing the same thing. I'll let you kind of tell your story, but we saw a huge need for research and just sort of joined forces and have started working together ever since.
Oh. Yeah, Dr. Corcoran, yeah.
Yeah, so my son is, Cindy mentioned, same age as her daughter. He was born with intestinal malrotation and he was diagnosed at 10 days old. And so one of the things that drew me to this research was that his surgeon, after he performed the LADS procedure on my son, came out and told us to buy a lottery ticket because our son is the luckiest kid. And then at his follow-up appointment, he told me again, he's the luckiest kid alive, you should buy a lottery ticket in his name. And so as a scientist myself, I was wondering, why does a person need luck to be diagnosed with intestinal malrotation? And so that's when I really became interested in studying what's going on. And my son, like Sydney, has continued to have problems after surgery. And so I joined the Facebook group and I saw that she had started I saw her before talking about her daughter, but then I saw she was starting this registry and so we connected and yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. It's funny how a big pain point can serve as a cause. And then even reading your bio, Dr. Martinez, how you went from, studying one thing and then just doing that pivot. And I know you talk heavily about patterns, which I think is very, very phenomenal. So let's talk a little bit about intestinal malrotation. I never knew about this condition until you reached out to me, Dr. Martinez. So could you tell us in simple terms what causes it? What's the epidemiology and what's like the mortality and morbidity outcomes for people who are diagnosed? And I imagine it's mostly seen in infants, and I'm also curious to know about their life trajectory as they go on.
Yes, I think most of us were also new to learning about intestinal malrotation as our either child was diagnosed or adults that are diagnosed themselves, because many people have not heard of it. So intestinal malrotation is a congenital anomaly, so it's a birth defect where your intestines do not rotate or position themselves in the abdomen, normally in embryonic development when this is forming. So the anatomy of the intestines is different. So the small bowel, normal anatomy, the small bowel is in the middle of your abdomen, and the colon goes up, over, and around like a picture frame. And so for intestinal malrotation patients, most of their small bowels on the one side and their colons on the other side, and it doesn't look like the typical anatomy. And this also places the individual at risk for volvulus or twisting of the intestines, which can have devastating consequences. Someone can lose their whole bowel, or it can also be fatal. And so volvulus is one of the most severe risks, but we're finding that even people who don't have volvulus or the twisting still have some of these some similar gastrointestinal struggles. And so we don't really fully understand the epidemiology of this condition. So that's part of what we're trying to do. It's complicated because not everybody's diagnosed. So there's quite a few people who can be walking around with malrotation and not know exactly. And so there are a couple really old studies. So a lot of the research that was done in this condition was done in the 1930s to 50s. And there's a couple papers, one that estimates about 1 in 500 people have malrotation, but that's not, there's other studies that say more like 1 in 4,000 or 1 in 6,000 that have symptomatic malrotation. So those that are, having symptoms from their malrotation. So we're really trying to establish the epidemiology and get a better understanding. And the outcomes are focused mostly on volvulus and mortality. And not as much on quality of life and these longer term kind of living with seeing it as a chronic condition. For some.
So I imagine that it's diagnosed in newborn. And this was your first kid, right? For both of you, right?
It was my second child.
Your second child. Okay. Well, your child, yeah. But I imagine for Dr. Corcoran, like that was the first child. And when you hear a child isn't feeding well, you probably think, oh, let me adjust, let me do that and do that. Can you walk us just through how you went about making a definite diagnosis, and especially for parents who might be struggling with what's going on with my child, and what level of support did you have when it came to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you said is exactly sort of what happened. I think the initial thoughts were like colic, right? He was crying a lot. He seemed like he was in pain, but he was in pain, but I didn't know it was pain. I thought it was colic because you're told babies have colic.
Yeah.
He was spitting up and vomiting. But again, you're told, baby spit up, is a laundry problem. It's not a medical problem, right? These are things you're told. And so it was really difficult. We also thought that maybe he'd gotten the flu, or maybe I was breastfeeding. And so maybe he was reacting to something I was eating or medication I was on, because I had postpartum preeclampsia, so I was on medication. And so it was a Friday night, and he just wasn't keeping anything down. And he just vomited this very large neon yellow pool. And, we thought maybe we should go get formula, because we thought maybe it was my breast milk. And then I actually Googled online neon yellow vomit baby. And this blog post came up, and this person said, if your baby has neon yellow vomit, they might have this fatal rare condition. And that's when I was like, we got to go to the ER. Like, even if it's rare, at least needs to be evaluated by a medical professional to rule it out, because we can't get anything to stay down. And so very thankful we decided to go in, because the doctors told us if we hadn't, the situation would have been different.
Wow. So what are this sounds very, very scary. So say for example, if someone is diagnosed with cancer, we have biomarkers, you go run lab values and all that. Is surgery the only way to determine this, or how did they go about making a diagnosis of, intestinal malrotation?
The gold standard test for this is the upper GI with small bowel follow through. So they have the baby or the person drink a contrast, a barium contrast, and take a series of X-rays as it goes through the digestive system. And when the duodenum that leaves the stomach does not cross back over the midline in the C shape, when basically the small bowels sort of staying on that right side, then that's, from my understanding, the diagnosis for intestinal malrotation. And so then after that diagnosis, then you have to decide whether the person will have surgery or not. If someone's having a volvulus currently, then sometimes they go straight into an exploratory surgery and not have the actual test for it. Oftentimes the appendix is on the wrong side of the body. And so it's removed during the LADS procedures so that later on in life, the pain, if the person has appendicitis, it won't be on the wrong side and go undetected. Yeah. And so that's kind of a unique, sometimes it's discovered because a person's appendix is on the wrong side.
On the wrong side. Yeah. Oh, okay. Wow. So I have so many questions about this. When you were talking about your experience, Dr. Martinez, you mentioned how the surgeon told you this is great, everything is looking good, but then for them, they made their surgical outcomes, but that didn't necessarily, translate to your daughter, doing better. And that necessitated you going to find a community on Facebook, and you found out that you weren't the only one going through that. And I think the lesson here is just sometimes the clinical outcomes and how does that translate to what quality of life really, really means, right? It was a success from the surgeon's perspective. So can you just walk us through what are some of the long-term, complications that might necessitate additional follow-throughs, maybe some additional exploratory surgeries in patients who've had surgeries for intestinal malrotation?
Yeah, so after the LADS procedure, we were scheduled for one follow-up surgical follow-up visit just to check the incision. And our surgeon said, if you feel like everything looks fine, you don't even, you could probably even cancel that follow-up. And they were so confident that this was, this is just, you're going to forget that this even happened and move on with your lives. And we just really struggled after that with feeding. She was still vomiting just as much as she had been before. She was still not gaining weight, lots of different problems. And it was really difficult for me to get even referral to GI, gastroenterology care for her, because babies spit up and babies have colic and reflux. And so it just wasn't seen. But a mom typically knows something's not right.
I know, yeah.
And there's a mixture of sort of some medical trauma, and that experience changes everyone. It's everybody remembers the exact moment they learn about that and just kind of all details about it. And so there's a mix of that sort of, trauma but then your gut is telling you something is still not right. The sort of outcomes that we're seeing in the patient community are challenges with motility. So digestion, the bowels moving slower. Some have more constipation issues. Some have more diarrhea or back and forth. There's a lot of abdominal pain that's associated with this ongoing. There's always a risk of adhesions. And so we went through this long process of trying to decide if her pain was, you're at risk for volvulus still. And so you have to learn to differentiate between, is this, just some abdominal pain? Is this a volvulus? Is it adhesions causing problems? The GIs tell you to go back to the surgeon. It must be an adhesion problem. And then the surgeons say, well, we can't do anything about that. If we go in and go do another procedure, you could develop even more adhesions. And so you just get caught kind of in this limbo where it's just really, you sort of are in that, how do I feed my child? How do I keep this child alive? And everybody sort of a lot of us have gone through this for, it was probably up to about a year and a half before we were kind of in a good place where she was eating, food and not in daily pain.
Oh. Wow. So for both of your kids, they turned 6 this year, correct? Congratulations. How are they doing? And what has been the biggest lesson so far as when it comes to the interaction with the healthcare system?
Yes, for us, it's been kind of ups and downs. It's definitely getting a lot better as she gets older because she's becoming her own advocate and she's able to communicate, when she feels like she cannot eat a certain food or eat any more food. She's really good at taking her medications and that sort of thing. So I think she's, the older she's getting, the easier that gets. And we've also gotten to a place we've gone through different specialists to the point where we have her on a good medication bowel regimen and have her in a good place. But we still have, if she gets sick, she gets hit harder than I think other kids do. Typically, she's more sensitive to that kind of thing. Her guts sort of shut down anytime she has a virus and that sort of thing. So, but for the most part, she's doing really well, and she loves meeting other kiddos on Facebook and meeting other malrotation patients just like her.
That's great. How about for you, Dr. Corcoran?
Yeah, he's doing really well. We still have to watch what he eats and sort of pay attention to that. And he discovered some other conditions he has as well, and so that's been a process. We're still in that process, and as there's not a lot of research on malrotation, so these conditions may very well be sort of comorbid with malrotation, sort of co-occurring, but that's still something Cindy and I are working on looking at. But he's doing much better.
That's good to hear. Now that they are much older, I'm just curious if you are liberty to share. You talked about being on meds. Are these the norm for patients who have, had surgery? Because usually you think surgery will resolve most of the issues. And what kind of meds are they on? And then the second follow-up question to that would be, you talked about food restrictions. What are, typical food considerations people that have, experienced this have to take?
So we're still trying to characterize and find out, what proportion of patients are actually needing medications and things. But common medications include, laxatives. So there's a lot of slow motility, and so a lot of these kiddos are on, or patients are on laxatives, antispasmodics. My daughter was on erythromycin to help her stomach empty for several years, and so those types of medications. I think diet-wise, my daughter, the popcorn is the only thing she can't really have, but a lot of people have dairy intolerances, or I think this population does actually better with less fiber or being careful with getting too much fiber just because it slows the transit down. And so, we're really trying to explore. The patients share lots of dietary, things that they've learned along the way that help them, and they kind of compare and contrast quite a bit. The FODMAP diet is something I'm not, recommending anything, but just these are the common things that everyone sort of does food diaries and learns what foods help or hurt them. Exactly. And it differs across patients, but yeah.
Thank you for that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Dr. Corcoran, or is that extensive enough?
So Aiden's not on any medication right now. We just watch foods that are generally constipating versus foods that are the opposite, and we have to balance them. Just be really careful with what he eats, or he'll go and he just flips to one direction or the other.
Got it. Thank you. So for both of you, you had your interest, and then there's this confluence point of building up the research, and it's also heavy on community engagement and talking to people who have been affected by this. For some of us researchers where we have disease conditions that we're very passionate about, and that's a blessing. One of the many blessings that when we come home, we can leave our work at work. We don't live with our work, as it were. How do you balance that? Because it's not just a research idea for you. It's not just something to get funded. This is deeply personal. How are you not too overwhelmed by seeing the problem at work and then seeing the problem at home again? I don't know if that question made sense.
Yes, it does. I think for me, I pivoted with my research into this area because I was just immersing myself in all of this and started, as scientists, you look for gaps in the literature and ways of, and patterns, and you're looking for ways of contributing to science and advancing knowledge. And I just saw this as a huge gap. There's so many questions that we need answers to. And I was, studying, I was reading all the published literature I could just for my own personal reasons. And I'm a systems thinker and see, what parts of, not that I have the answers to everything, but just where could the system be improved so that on, kind of on a population level, people aren't being missed. I really wanted my health equity research background, saw this as, I have a PhD, I work within the medical system, the health academic medical system. And I had a really hard time to get GI care for my daughter. And so it shouldn't be, like Katie was saying, it should not be that hard to get, diagnosed or get follow-up care when you need it. And so that's, why I started to kind of pivot to this area. And the patients are extremely, supportive of our work and participate. They want this research to be done. And so that's also really helpful and motivating for us to keep working on this.
Thank you so much for that. And so it's in academia, especially the kind of work we do, there are two things we have to worry about: the engagement with the community of interest that we are passionate about, and also funders backing that idea up, right? So it's one thing to be able to get access to your community. It seems you already have that access. What has it been like for you in sourcing for external funds? Has that been quite easy to help fuel the passion for your research?
I think we had to be creative with our funding mechanisms that we choose. We've been really lucky to have acquired some funding for this. We looked at the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, so the PCORI Foundation actually really almost requires and really wants to see patient-engaged research and outcomes that matter to patients, and comparing interventions or treatments that help patients and their clinicians make informed decisions about their healthcare. And so that was a really good fit for our work. I think I was concerned that we were going to have a hard time justifying studying something that was sort of a rare condition. Yeah. We don't really know the epidemiology. We don't know how rare this is, but it is fairly rare. Most of the patients say that they were their doctor's first case. Mm-hmm. And so we were a little bit worried about that, but I think that's a big reason we started the Empower registry, was to get some preliminary data to justify the need and to demonstrate the unmet needs of the patient community.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now let's talk about the Empower, right? This is like the intestinal malrotation patient outcomes and wellness registry, right? It's self-reported. It's online as well. Can you just discuss talk about some of the challenges and rewards of building that registry? And I'm also curious to know about what's the size of it? How do you go about maintaining it, and the impact it's had on those families as well?
Sure. So this was just sort of our way of trying to quantitatively capture some of the stories and data that the patient community was sharing online. At any single institution, it's hard to find enough cases of malrotation to really describe patterns and trends. And so we tapped into the Facebook communities and Instagram communities to capture these stories in the form of data. So we have a big baseline survey that people participate in and they enroll in, and then they're followed up every 6 months. We launched the registry in 2021, and we had almost 200 responses even in the first 2-3 months of launching it. And so we were able to put together a baseline paper for that. We got lots of enthusiasm at first, and we've continued to have people registering, but it was not as much as that launch. We had a really big following that launch, and so we have over 250 registrants now. Wow. But that gives us also a contact list. We've asked people if they want to be contacted in the future for additional research studies. So it gives us that contact list where we can do additional
research.
Reach people.
Follow up.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so that's been really helpful.
Yeah. I know the outcomes will be I mean, I imagine there was a clinical trial. The secondary or primary endpoints might be different depending on what they're trying to do. But are you aware of any company, any pharma company trying to develop their pipeline to aid in this, quest, and if they're also partnering with you in any level?
We've really thought about the pharma direction, and with this being a surgical
Yeah,
management, condition, it's really hard for us to decide, what
direction. Yeah.
how this would be a drug development, research area. I think that there's room for us to really understand motility, and digestion and laxatives and all of that with the community, and then also visceral sensitivity. So the pain receptors in the gut and that sort of thing. I think there's a need for that in this area, but yeah, we're struggling with it being a surgical surgical treatment.
Yeah,
it's hard to
to
get attention from pharma companies.
I know, because surgery is so specialized, and it's not something you can roll out on a commercial basis to reap, profits and all that. So the business model is quite, it's not quite conventional. Dr. Corcoran, your research covers various social science topics, and you've done a lot of work. And congrats on your recently published manuscript, by the way. Now, how does your work on groups and network inform your understanding of patient and caregiver networks within rare diseases like malrotation? Basically, what have you brought from your experience in social sciences in working with this unique patient population?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things my background brings is the recognition that concepts like health and wellness and illness and disease are not just objective, like people often think. They're not just based on identify particular symptoms, but they're also subjective, and they're a part of sort of social processes. Right. And so some groups have to fight to have their diseases recognized as diseases. Right. And so there's new diseases are recognized over time. And with intestinal malrotation, we have patients that are having symptoms that are related, right? They're saying are related to their malrotation, but it's not being recognized by doctors because that's not what doctors are taught in medical school. Right. And so the doctor's perceptions based on their education are affecting how they interact and perceive patients and their symptoms. Right. And so I think a sociological perspective helps with that, to sort of conceptualize the beliefs that come into diagnosis and treatment, and how we might work on changing those beliefs.
As we're talking, I was just, shaking my head because I have endometriosis, and it took a while to be able to get that definitive diagnosis. And I can relate with the medical gaslighting. And this is me, with the mouth and being able to advocate for myself. Now, how much more you both serving as proxies to your little ones who are not able to verbalize what they're going through. And you might be chalked down and say, oh, you're just a first-time mom, or you're just a nervous mom. That's nothing. And thank goodness for the community you guys have created, because I imagine it's just been a saving hope for these families being able to finally have a voice and get a resource to be able to, find out what could be going on and how can I get supported. So you've both talked about just the benefits and how it was setting it up. But I'm curious to know, what was your top challenge? Because I imagine it's not a walk in the park, building a registry together, right? So what have been your biggest challenges, and how did you go about navigating those challenges?
Yeah, so we brought together a team to help guide the development of the registry. So we had clinicians involved and patients, we're moms of children with malrotation, but we brought in some adult patients that have lived with it themselves, and then clinicians from multiple disciplines to put this registry together. And I think when we were, working on that, and then also trying to get our first paper published, we got some criticism that this is patient-reported data. Patients don't know their own medical history well enough to accurately report their experiences. And then it's also, we recruited online through social media. And so it could be seen as the tip of the iceberg, like only the people who are having trouble and struggling are the ones that are going to, complete your registry. And so that, I think, was a challenge for us to navigate. We have since then been tapping into some clinical data. There's some health information exchange networks out there that we're able to get get data from across numerous institutions to look at patient outcomes, and we're seeing very similar patterns. And I think that was the turning point when the clinicians started realizing that the clinical data is saying very similar things. And so that's when we've really started to build a good team. And then we're getting, like I said, clinicians from different disciplines involved, because it touches so many different areas. So radiology, nursing, emergency medicine, primary care, surgery, gastroenterology, all of the different psychology, a lot of the different disciplines we're trying to bring together to solve this problem and kind of come up with some solutions together.
Wow. Do you have a yearly meetup, with parents and families, just to come together and talk about, the state of the disease and what's current research questions you're trying to address and all that kind of stuff through your registry? Is that something planned as well, if you're not doing that yet?
So we have an awareness day that the community observes in January, so January 15th. And so that is when a lot online, everyone's sort of telling their stories and that sort of thing. We're also planning a virtual annual meeting starting at this March, where we're hoping to have those kind of conversations, have some educational sessions, but then also have some patient panels and discussions around research questions, what we should be asking and trying to answer.
Thank you. So for both of you, and I think starting with Dr. Corcoran, you're both researchers who stepped into patient advocacy due to personal circumstances, right? For those who find themselves or their loved ones diagnosed with a rare disease, what are some of the tips to provide, especially considering how overwhelming it is? What are some of the things you like recycled words of wisdom you would like to pass across to them?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely say to find your community, right? Or if it doesn't exist, work to create it, right? I think it really helps to have other people who are experiencing the same thing or have experienced the same thing. And then I think one of the things we did was start identifying the particular knowledge and skill sets that people have, right? And so Cindy and I have sort of a research methodological background, but then we've connected with others who have, communication background and who have these different backgrounds. And so if we bring us all together, right, we can, from the ground up, we can advocate for ourselves. And then also telling our stories is really important, and telling them in a way that forces people to listen, because our stories are powerful, and when on their own, but also when combined with research and patient engagement.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Martinez? Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I think finding your community is perfect. I think also just when joining the sort of rare condition community is sort of isolating. A lot of people that are in your circle don't necessarily know what that's like, and so just finding other people that even just understand and kind of get the challenges and the struggles is just helpful and motivating when times get hard. But yeah, I think getting all of the different perspectives together is important, and then we're really trying to put stories together in a way that speaks to the medical community and the scientific community, so that we can, work towards changing systems and changing processes and getting more knowledge out there.
Oh, that's
so
great.
People aren't slipping through the cracks.
That's really great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we've talked about just your initial research ideas and how that pivoted to what both of you are working on now on intestinal malrotation. That's one level. And then with your Empower registry, that's also another level of collaboration. But right now, let's talk about just institutional collaboration, between University of Oklahoma and West Virginia University. As someone who's just, been in academia just for a couple of years, one of the things that I dread is all those agreements and, setting those agreements together, which is a lot of work, and it takes away so much time for everything else. How have you been able to navigate those institutional agreements, which I think sometimes it's like, this is academia. We should be at the frontier of making things fast and effective, but there's still a long way to go. What are some of the challenges you've experienced and, words of wisdom in that area?
Yes, that's definitely a challenge. And I think we're still working through some of those processes. We had 3 grants and contracts hit just about the same exact time, like all 3 in the summer. And I think our universities are not very happy with us a little bit from all of the.
Well, congrats,
they were
though.
like, oh, thank you. They were sort of like, can we do one agreement for all of these? And we were like, that would work for us. I don't know, but yeah, it's been challenging. It's hard to keep them all straight, and people are forgetting which ones were which and that sort of thing. But West Virginia is an IDEA state, just like Oklahoma, and we were Big 12, institutions. I think we're switching, but that's given us, I think it's been, they've really wanted collaborations across IDEA states, across our, we have OSCTR, and they have WVCTSI, so the Clinical Translational Science Institute there at WVU. And so that, our states are similar and our institutions are similar. So that's been really helpful. Our institutions had some previous collaborations with Medical Record Exchange. And so that has, we are very thankful for the people who have done that work ahead of us to have some data sharing agreements, drafted and that sort of thing. So that's been helpful for us as well.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for that reminder. As far as just don't give up and make sure you don't reinvent the wheel. If you have people who have done that ahead of you, just reach out and ask for help. All right, good. Thank you. So you've talked about your 3 grants. Can you tell us just the main objectives and how they are helping you to push your research agenda forward?
The objectives for
your grants, the 3 grants you just got. Yeah, congrats, by the way. That's
thank you.
Very impressive. Yeah.
Yes. So our PCORI contract, so with our Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, that is a capacity building. It's a Eugene Washington award to build capacity for research. And so that is giving us funding to, more formally establish our advisory board and also provide opportunities for listening sessions with our patient and caregivers, and then hold our virtual annual meeting. So that's going to be at the end of March. And what the goal for that is to develop a research agenda, a patient-centered comparative effectiveness research agenda for intestinal malrotation. So it's strategic planning, a lot of meetings, and really trying to identify our priorities of where to go. Katie, do you want to talk about the NSF?
Yeah, so we also have a National Science Foundation grant, and that grant is focused on looking at predictors of delays in diagnosis, specifically focused on social determinants. And so looking at the role of the patient being marginalized, how doctors might interact with them or perceive them differently, and then also specifically looking at how physician networks with each other, how they're connected to each other through patients, how that can affect sort of the knowledge they have and ideas they have, particularly about, potentially new ideas for diagnoses and how that can affect time till diagnosis for rare diseases. And then using the case of intestinal malrotation to sort of look at those things.
And then the third one, so the PCORI, NSF, and which one is the third one?
Yeah, so we have Presbyterian Health Foundation funding. It's a seed grant that is going to allow us to bidirectionally validate or empower registry. So our registry, because it was self-reported data, and we kept getting some criticism that patients don't know their own data, we decided to look into that and see if how patients, when they self-report their dates of surgery, if they've had a bowel resection, so bowel removed during their surgery, those types of things, if they're reported, if they match what's in the medical records. And so we're using OU's Clinical Research Data Warehouse to look at OU's patient population, our malrotation population and their medical records. And we're going to try and recruit some people to take our self-reported surveys to compare. And then we're also going to be inviting our Empower registrants to send us their actual medical records, so retrieve them and send them securely to us so that we can compare those responses.
Wow, thank you. For patients, for those who are listening who would like to be a part of your community or who are interested in supporting your work, how can they reach out to you?
Yes, we are working on establishing a website for that. But right now they can just email me at sydney-martinez@ouhsc.edu. And then they can also find us. We are active in the online patient communities for malrotation as well.
Okay. And I'll include both of your emails. Is that okay, Dr. Corcoran, to put your email in the show notes? All right, I'll do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. We're kind of winding down, but I had some additional fringe questions. So as far as intestinal malrotation is concerned, what do you think are some of the key research questions we should be exploring? Burning questions we should be exploring?
I think we have questions all along the natural history of intestinal malrotation. Even, we really don't understand the cause of intestinal malrotation. We suspect there's a genetic component, but we have not. That's not well established. We need ways of accelerating time to diagnosis because it's a birth defect, and so you're born with it, and so any kind of delay, in diagnosis is a risk. We need to really understand the best surgical and non-surgical methods. I think patients have a hard time deciding, especially the old, for the adults and older population at diagnosis, they have a hard time deciding whether they should go through with the surgery, if there are other alternative options. And then we need to really understand the outcomes after surgery, because I think there's a lot of unmet needs for patients. In terms of needing follow-up care, having these chronic symptoms, what nutrition is best for these people, and understanding motility and pain management, all of these types of things. Psychological impacts of a lot of this is important. We also, as Katie mentioned, suspect some co-occurring illnesses. We see some higher frequencies of some co-occurring conditions that we are wondering if that's associated with malrotation. So really we have a lot more questions than answers right now.
Yeah. But this is why it's probably going to be a lifelong work for both of you. I can definitely see the merits and most of the merits associated with that. So we talked a lot about the morbidity. Do you happen to know some of the mortality outcomes as far as lifetime expectancy and surgical, outcomes, maybe, and survival as well?
I know prior to 1936, when the LADS procedure was developed, the mortality was about 100% for volvulus. And so, mortality rates have gotten a whole lot better, but we're still losing people that, just because of, lack of awareness and knowledge and when signs are there, the misconception that the vomit needs to be green or it's not an emergency. So we found in our registry more people were presenting with yellow bilious vomiting, or not even having bilious yellow or green vomit. And so I think, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of signs and symptoms and differentiating this from other things. I think abdominal pain and vomit is just really hard to diagnose, but
wow. Sounds like a whole lot. Wow. Let's pivot a little bit into AI and just, emerging technologies as well. And given how that's changing healthcare landscapes, how do you envision the future regarding, intestinal malrotation and how emerging technologies like AI can really help with generating those hidden but, important level of evidence you need in characterizing this problem?
I think AI is a challenge because we have to have the data to feed the AI models, and so where they know what to describe,
like
and what
chicken
to
and the egg, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. We don't have the information feeding the models or the AI. tools. But I think you're right in terms of emerging technology, we have, the electronic medical records and the exchanges, between institutions that already happen. I think that's a huge, opportunity for us to start broadening beyond one institution, because there's just not enough patients in any single institution for us to really explore these different levels of severity in these patients, I think. And emerging technology in terms of, telehealth and having patients have, like, in rural areas, having access to, those with more experience in more metropolitan areas that see this more often. I think, with mHealth, mobile health, and smartphone apps, we could develop ways of tracking these symptoms after surgery and that type of thing. So lots of potential opportunities with technology.
As we're even talking, I was just thinking about just the voluminous data we have and how, when you're talking about patterns, right? Imagine if we're able to even see patients who have complained about this in the past, but then they were never definitely diagnosed, and AI is able to go and just dig through those voluminous data and, make a pattern about these were some of the, breadcrumbs that were left behind. But then you have to have access to those data in the first place, and it has to make sense. But yeah, we can only dream in a perfect world, right? Dr. Corcoran, this question is for you. So you have done a lot of work on mega churches and religious sociology, which is, fascinating stuff in itself. I feel like you deserve like another episode on your own. And you're able to, from your work, it seems you have that deep understanding of belief systems and community structures. Are you able to draw any parallels between those social structures and the communities you have formed around health conditions like malrotation?
Yes, a lot of my research looks at how communities form and how they stay strong, and sort of the factors that can affect cohesiveness and solidarity and these types of things. And it doesn't matter if it's a religious community or if it's a, rare disease community, right? The factors that, make communities are very similar. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely brought my attention to the importance of community for rare disease patients and caregivers, and just being able to join together and support each other and work towards particular goals.
Wow, that's very, very impressive. So, Dr. Martinez, you reached out, and by the way, thank you so much for your email. It was very great receiving it, telling me about your work, but I'm just curious to know, what made you want to sign up for the podcast? That's one, and I had a follow-up to that.
Yes, I think, we're ready to share with our patient community the work that we've done, and we're excited to be making progress. That all started with the participants joining the registry and sharing their data and their information with us. And so I think, we're getting a lot of interest and traction with clinicians and other researchers and the patients and caregivers themselves. And so I think we're just ready to, make sure everybody is aware that we are working on this and that we have lots of different directions and lots of opportunity for people who would like to join our research team, because there's more, we have lots of data and more research questions than we have time to answer just ourselves.
That's a good call. So what kind of help are you needing as far as skill sets for your intending, for those who might be interested in joining your team?
We can take any skill set that people have, really, if they're willing to, if they're motivated to help us with this, and really fully understand the nuances for this condition and the gaps. And we have most of our sort of clinician, disciplines represented, and we have a lot of patients and both adults and then caregivers involved. But yeah, anybody that has, we're looking at, patient reported outcomes research and just
thank you.
Any sort of research question that people might have that we have data available, we'd be happy to autoimmune issues. There's just a lot of different fields that we are not experts in.
That's a call to action. So if you're interested, don't forget to reach out to them. I'll
Yes.
put their email addresses in the show notes. So as you know, this podcast is was sponsored and supported heavily by the OSCTR, which you're also very familiar with. How has that been a support for the work you do with, intestinal malrotation, if any? Have you been supported by OSCTR?
Yes, I have been supported from OSCTR from the very beginning of my faculty career.
Right.
And then we, definitely use the Red Cap resources and all of the career development resources that they've provided has been, excellent and has helped shape this work.
Yay, thank you for that plug. So this is going to be my final question for both of you. If you could have a superpower for a day, what would it be and how would you use it?
Oh goodness. Maybe pausing time and trying to get some more of these answers, quicker. I think we had a patient recently that said, I wish we were 50 years ahead of where we are now for malrotation. And so, just getting or a time machine where we can go and find some of these answers now.
Okay, Dr. Strange. How about you, Dr. Corcoran? What would be your superpower and how would you use it?
That was my exact answer. Time travel.
Time travel.
The ability and thinking about that same patient. Just being able to go to the future, find all the new medical technologies.
And bring it back. And I think
not just to now, but before, so we can save our.
Yeah, it will make sense. Yes. It may make sense because timeliness is very important in the condition of your interest, the condition you're talking about when it comes to being diagnosed in time and reducing just the impact and just some of the implications they go through. So I can imagine why time is such an important commodity for both of you.
Yes, our clinician colleagues have said, you're trying to go too far. We first need to establish that this is a problem before we come up with solutions, and we're ready for solutions.
Yeah. But hey, you have a dual interest in being those that have been directly affected and also passionate researchers. So that's the other side of the sword. This has been fantastic talking to both of you. You made it so easy. Your passion really shines through, and I've learned a whole lot about this condition. And I imagine those that listen to this have also that might be directly affected by it, or even know somebody I felt very supported and seen. And thank you for adding to the diversity and richness of our conversation for this podcast, because it was my first time hearing about the condition. And I was so, intrigued by it that I read more. I'm like, how come I wasn't taught this when I was in pharmacy school, or even when I was in practice, I'd never heard about it. But, we learn every day. I don't know if you had any final parting words you'd like to leave behind before we wrapped up today's session.
No, just thank you for having us on and being interested in helping us share our work and our passion.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll leave this using both of your words. So for you, Dr. Martinez, you talked about, seeing patterns and being able to recognize that. I think that's a good eye, and I'll live with that. And I also like to challenge our listeners to live with that. And for you, Dr. Corcoran, there was something you said about if there's no community, find your community. If it doesn't exist, create it. And this is a call to action. We can't do life alone anymore. And I mean, the NIH, for example, emphasizes team science. So this is your for the listeners, it's your charge to go find your ecosystem and thrive in it. And if it doesn't exist, create one. And so, on behalf of everyone, we just want to say thank you to you both, Dr. Martinez and Dr. Corcoran, for your time today. And if there are other ways we can support you on the podcast, maybe as your grant is, taking wing and you have some interesting findings you'd like to share, or just some causes you'd like to raise, please consider coming back again. I would love to. It would be an honor to bring you back on and do some updates as well. And if you would like to involve some of your patient partners as well, more than happy to, have that conversation being populated as part of our podcast as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll take you up on that.
Thank you for your time. All right. Bye. All right, everyone. That was the GROklahoma podcast. I remain your host, Dr. Ogunsanya, or Dr. Mo. If you have anyone who you think would be a great fit for the podcast, we are looking to amplify voices of people doing clinical and transitional research in Oklahoma and also support them. So you don't have to be a researcher necessarily. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a special call out for support staff, admin staff, because your voices are important and we need to hear those as well. So reach out to me at GROklahoma podcast at ouhsc.edu. I'll catch you on another episode of this podcast, and take care. Bye.